They watching, 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 watching. They watching.
All right,
watching,
let's
watching,
jump
watching,
right in.
watching.
Today, we're tackling a massive moment in history. What happens when an empire falls? And not just any empire. We're talking about Rome. So here's the big question, right? What happens when a superpower collapses? We've all heard the term Dark Ages. It paints this picture of civilization just switching off. But was it really that simple? Yeah, not so much. I think what you're going to see is that the story of what came after Rome is way more complex, and frankly, a lot more fascinating. To really get our bearings, we have to look at the timeline, because this is super important. We tend to fixate on the fall of Rome in 476 AD, but the real story is so much bigger. I mean, the empire had already split in two way back in 285. And here's the kicker. While the western half did fall, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call the Byzantine Empire, kept the torch burning for almost another 1,000 years. Think about that. Until 1453. That's a huge piece of the puzzle that often gets completely overlooked. Okay, so let's zoom in on the West first. Was it the end of an era? For sure. But, and this is key, it wasn't like a light switch being flipped. It was this slow, grinding collapse that created this enormous power vacuum right across Europe.
You know, the Western Empire didn't just fall over one day. It was more like a death by 1,000 cuts. A real perfect storm. Internally, you had constant civil wars and a military that was basically making and breaking emperors whenever it felt like it. Layer on top of that crippling taxes that were just strangling the economy. And then, from the outside, you had this immense pressure from mass migration, or movement of peoples, as groups like the Goths were pushed west by the Huns. And when the Visigoths actually sacked the city of Rome itself in 410, wow, the psychological blow is just devastating. By the time we get to 476, the reality was local Germanic kings were already running the show in most provinces anyway.
Right, so that date, 476, when the last emperor finally gets the boot, it wasn't some kind of fiery apocalypse. It was more like the fever finally breaking. It was a symbol that the old way was officially done, and it marked the beginning of a brand new, much messier, and way more interesting chapter.
So, with the old Roman structure gone, what's next? This is where it gets really good. In the wake of this collapse, different places came up with totally different answers. We're going to look at three fascinating models: the inheritors in the West, the survivors in the East. In the old Roman province of Gaul, you have a Germanic people called the Franks, and they start building something new. They were really smart about it. They blended their own warrior culture with Roman institutions, especially Christianity. Getting their king, Clovis, baptized around 496 was a brilliant PR move, gave them eternal legitimacy. But in a world with no central government, how do you keep control? Their answer was the feudal system, a whole new social structure built on a web of personal loyalties. You give me soldiers, I give you land. A totally decentralized way of life. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. As far as they were concerned, they were Rome, the true unbroken continuation. You have Emperor Justinian I, and he doesn't just dream of reconquering the West, he commissions the Corpus Juris Civilis, a gigantic, comprehensive collection of all Roman law. That single act preserved a legal tradition that would become the foundation for many of Europe's modern legal systems. And to get the real global picture, we have to look way, way east. Because while Europe was in the middle of this massive reorganization, Tang China was in its golden age. We're talking about the largest, most populous, and wealthiest state on Earth at the time. And the engine for all of this? The Silk Road. This wasn't just a route for silk, it was this incredible artery, pumping goods, ideas, technology, and culture, connecting China to pretty much the rest of the known world.
So, let's just hit pause around the year 800 and look at the state of play. You've got three totally different paths unfolding. In the West, the Franks under Charlemagne are running on personal loyalty and a powerful alliance with the church in a pretty local, farm-based economy. The Byzantines are keeping the old Roman-style centralized bureaucracy alive, dominating global trade from Constantinople. And then you've got Tang China, powered by a merit-based civil service and the insane wealth of the Silk Road, cranking out world-changing inventions. Three very different worlds, all flourishing at the same time.
Just as this new post-Roman order started to kind of settle in, a new force just erupts from the north. They were the great disruptors, a people who would raid, trade, and settle their way all across Europe, changing the map and the course of history all over again. You know who I'm talking about? The Vikings.
To get a sense of the sheer shock they caused, you just have to listen to this account. It's from the scholar Alcuin of York, reacting to that 793 raid on the holy island of Lindisfarne. He wrote, "Never before has such a terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The Church of St. Cuthbert is spattered with the blood of the priests of God." I mean, it's chilling. And that raid is really seen as the dramatic opening act of the entire Viking Age.
So we get this image, right, of these savage, bloodthirsty pagans. And, well, it comes to us almost entirely from their victims, especially the monks who were writing the chronicles. And look, the raids were very real and very brutal. Let's not downplay that. But the full picture is so much more complex. The Vikings were also skilled traders, brilliant explorers, and farmers. They set up vast trade networks, and this is amazing, they were the first Europeans to reach North America, a place they called Vinland.
And let's just bust a few more myths, because the reality is fascinating. The word Viking itself just means to go on a journey. It was something you did, not something you were. They weren't just destroyers, they were founders of cities like Dublin. And those horned helmets, pure 19th century opera invention. There is zero archaeological evidence for them. And far from being filthy, we find tons of combs and grooming tools in their graves. And on top of it all, they were incredible poets and storytellers, leaving behind these epic sagas about gods and heroes. Okay, so if we pull all these different threads together, we start to see that history isn't this neat story of empires falling and then rising. No way. It's messy, it's dynamic, it's about fragmentation, yes, but it's also about the creation of totally new identities and new political systems that would go on to shape the very world we live in today. Take the Frankish Empire, the most powerful of these successor states. Under a guy like Charlemagne, it united a huge chunk of Western Europe. But that unity was fragile, built around one powerful figure. After he died, his grandsons almost immediately started a destructive civil war. It all ended with the Treaty of Verdun in 843, which split that empire into 3 new kingdoms, laying the very early foundations for what would eventually become France and Germany. And here is a perfect example of how the disruptors themselves get transformed. Remember those feared Vikings who settled in northern France? Through this process called assimilation, they adopted the local language and the Christian religion. These Northmen became the Normans, a powerful new force who would, just a couple centuries later, go on to conquer England. The disruptors became the new establishment. So when we look back, the world after Rome really wasn't a dark age of ignorance and isolation. It completely misses the point. It was a dynamic and surprisingly connected world. An age of competing powers, vibrant trade networks stretching from America to China, and the forging of new, complex identities. The story of what came after Rome shows that collapse is very often a form of transformation. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What old structures are collapsing in our own time, and what new, messy, and creative transformations are we living through right now?
Signal detected. Firewall breach. Begin transmission.
They watching. They watching.